Welcome again to Covenant to Life. Today I have a very special guest and a newfound friend, a fellow with very interesting history, Jacob Sorensen. Welcome. I just met Jacob a few weeks ago and found his stories to be so interesting that I thought you might enjoy it if I share it with you. You see, Jacob and all his volunteers here at Covenant to Life share at least two common passions, Yahuwah and a love for the people and the nation of Israel.
Jacob and I haven't met before today, and it's interesting, the introduction to Jacob occurred exactly when we were making a video on his namesake from the Tanakh. Jacob, literally, Yaakov, I am anxious to hear your history.
It feels different in Jerusalem than any place in the world. And we came upon some Jewish women praying. And when you're at the Western Wall, you lean into the wall and you pray. And I leaned into the wall and I don't want to exaggerate, I don't want to embellish here, but I did. I came back off the wall and I looked at the wall and I thought, well, what is that? I mean, to me, it felt different. And so I leaned back into the wall and I prayed. And Ron, the guy that was with me, leaned into the wall and prayed. I said, you didn't tell me where the Holy of Holies was down there. He said it was right where those women were praying. And I said, I wish you would have told me that. And I realized, well, that's where we were praying, and that's where that happened. I walked over to Ron, and Ron had his back to me, and I said, Ron, did you notice anything down in that tunnel? And he just whirled around, and he said, oh man, did you feel that? And I said, well, I don't know, what did you feel? And he described it, and it was the same thing I felt. And I think it's because the Shekinah, the presence of God, came down there, and his name is on that city.
So that's a great introduction. In Scripture, we won't actually hit that Scripture today, but he says Jerusalem or Yerushalayim is mine.
Yeah.
He says, where I place my name, I will bless. And so you were talking about special of all places on earth. It is the only place on earth where he makes that statement about that this city is mine. So, as we go into the Scripture here, we're going to see Yaakov be brought into the covenant. But it's good perspective because that was, 4,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, I'm not sure the number. And yet, it's evident today. We can look and understand that when he said, I will keep this people, I will multiply you, I will spread you. Even though we're so techie today, we can look back and say, boy, there's one thing we can compare what's in that Tanakh over there with what's happening on earth today, and that's pretty sweet. So thanks for that, Jake.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now let's return back to Genesis. In our last module, using Genesis 28 as our study text, we observed two dramatic events which resulted in the privilege and the responsibility of the oldest son often was given through the birthright and the parental blessing. This was passed along to Yaakov. While Esau freely gave up his birthright, it was not so with Yitzhak's blessing. Yitzhak had poor eyes, and he was tricked by Rebekah and Yaakov into believing that Yaakov was Esau. Yitzhak was angry with Yaakov, but the blessing remained with Yaakov.
It's worth recalling that Yahuwah told Rebekah during her childbirth that two nations were battling within her, and that the older of the twins would serve the younger.
Do you remember the verse?
Genesis 25:22 through 23. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why do I live? And she went to inquire of Yahuwah. And Yahuwah said unto her, two nations are in your womb, and two peoples shall be separated from your bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger.
That didn't appear to be a prophecy about only Esau and Jacob. It sounds like a prophecy of the generations that would follow them.
It does sound that way. Remember, Yahweh was building nations through Abraham, but he was also singling out a covenant people. The blessing was a big deal. If we can review the language that Yitzhak spoke to Esau and Yaakov, it should become pretty clear. Let's pull out what Yitzhak said to Yaakov in the blessing language and what he said to Esau.
Here's Genesis 27, verse 27 to 29. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his raiment, and blessed him, and said, See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field, which Yahuwah has blessed. And Elohim give you of the dew of the heaven, and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain, and new wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be mighty over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone that curses you, and blessed be everyone that blesses you.
What can we glean from that?
Well, here are the main points. Number 1, Elohim give you the dew of the heaven and the fatness of the earth. Number 2, plenty of grain and new wine. 3, people serve you and nations bow down to you. 4, be mighty over your brethren. And 5, let your mother's sons bow down to you. 6, cursed be everyone that curses you, and blessed be everyone that blesses you.
Now read a little farther in that chapter, verses 38-40 for comparison.
Verse 38, And Esau said unto his father, Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Yitzhak his father answered and said unto him, Behold, of the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and the dew of heaven from above. And by your sword shall you live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you shall break loose, that you shall shake his yoke from off your neck.
Let's break that down too.
Okay. First, the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and the dew of heaven from above. Second, and by the sword shall you live. Next, you shall serve your brother. And fourth, it shall come to pass, when you shall break loose, you shall shake his yoke from off your neck.
Now let's compare them side by side. The first is common to both. They will live off the fatness of the earth. Second, Yaakov is blessed with plenty of grain and new wine, and Esau will live by the sword. Third, fourth, and fifth of Yaakov's blessing would deal with people serving him, including his mother's son Esau. And quote, brethren.
You know, it's interesting. This corresponds with the opposite statement for Esau. You shall serve your brother.
Yes, but in addition to this, there's a kind of mysterious last verse related to the future of Esau, or the children thereof. Yitzhak tells him that it will come to pass when you shall break loose. You shall shake the yoke from off your brother's neck. This seems to be relating to Esau serving his brother.
You know, I've heard the yoke described in two different ways. The first is probably the most common interpretation, that a yoke is used to force an animal to work for a master. The second is the idea of two animals working side by side, sometimes an older and a younger, so the older would have a calming influence.
Are you suggesting that rather than an animal-master relationship, it may be referring to a joint working relationship with Esau or his descendants?
I don't know, it's just food for thought. Either case, we can see that Jacob was given a blessing that was superior to what Esau received. This blessing involved abundance of grain and being head of a family, while Esau's would be sustained by the sword and subservient to Jacob.
How well did Esau accept this?
He was angry. He was really angry.
How angry?
Well, let's allow Scripture to answer this. Chapter 27, verse 41, I'll read it. And Esau hated Yaakov because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. then will I slay my brother Yaakov.
Lloyd, you asked how angry. I would say very, very angry.
I'm going to read the rest of chapter 27 here, and the first two verses of 28. And as I read it, watch for two things. First, Yitzchak's change in his anger towards his son Yaakov after he apparently stole the blessing that would have gone to Esau. And secondly, with Yahweh's providential hand on Yaakov. Verse 42, and the words of Esau and her elder son were told to Rebekah, and she sent and called Yaakov her younger son, and said unto him, Behold, your brother Esau, as concerning you, does comfort himself, proposing to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, and arise, flee you to Laban, my brother, to Haran, and stay with him a few days, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets that which you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you forth from there. Why should I be robbed of you both in one day? And Rebekah said to Yitzchak, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Yaakov takes a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these of the daughters of the land, what good shall my life do me? And Yitzchak called Yaakov and blessed him and charged him and said unto him, You shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother.
You asked two questions. First, Yitzchak's change of mind. He went from sore at being tricked to reiterating a blessing. Shortly we will see the rest of that blessing. As far as the second part, Yahuwah's providential hand, I'm not sure.
I think I know what Jake's getting at. One obvious point is that Rebekah wanted to save Yaakov's life from Esau, but the methodology is to have him flee to his mother's father's house until she calls him back. But like any good mom, she didn't want him to take a bride from a group of people which she didn't think much of, the Hethite. So she brings this up with the elderly Yitzchak. He quickly responds in agreement with Rebekah's proposal. Yaakov should go to her brother Laban's house. A little more history is at the end of chapter 26 in verse 34. We find the following statement. And when Esau was 40 years old, he took to a wife Judith, the daughter of Beri, the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite. And they were a grief to the mind of Yitzhak and to Rebekah.
So what you are saying is that Rebekah chose to set up an opportunity for Yaakov to get out of town, so to speak, justifying the flight by reminding Yitzhak that she didn't want the situation with Esau and his choice of brides to repeat itself.
That seems to be a reasonable explanation.
But where is the providential hand of Yahuwah evident here?
Well, as often is, the workings of Yahuwah are behind the scenes, even in Scripture at times. What is not shown here is that the journey that Yaakov has ahead, he was being groomed to spend the next 14 years in Laban's household, followed by the furtherance of his relationship with Yahuwah. And later, we will find throughout Scripture continually that Yahuwah didn't want the covenant people mixing with the nations. The reason becomes very clear later, but I will offer it now. The nations were caught in practices of worship which were considered insulting and filthy to Yahuwah. Things were working out exactly how Yahuwah had intended them. Yaakov would go.
He's going to leave all right, but before he does, let's read the rest of what the elderly Yitzchak had to say to his son. I'll read chapter 28 and verse 3. And El Shaddai bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be a company of peoples, and give you the blessing of Abraham to you, and to your seed with you, and that you may inherit the land of your sojournings, which Elohim gave unto Abraham. Verse 5, and Yitzchak sent away Yaakov, and he went to Padan Aram unto Laban, son of Bethuel, and the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, and Jacob's and Esau's mother.
Wow. There are blessings, and then there are super blessings. Jacob just won the lottery of lotteries. He was given the blessing of Abraham. The blessing of Abraham.
I told you that we shouldn't stop short. It appears that he is now in the covenant lineage. Not Esau, the firstborn, but the younger twin Yaakov. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Jacob.
Yes, and as we advance this study forward in subsequent videos, it will become very clear that Yahuwah set this up. He will refer to himself many times by the following saying, I am Yahuwah, the Elohim of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Or, as our readers may have in their scriptures, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But before we close this section, let's read the next 5 verses. There's a nugget tucked away in there which we shouldn't miss.
I can read that. Verse 6. Now Esau saw that Yitzchak had blessed Yaakov and sent him away to Padan Aram to take him a wife. And from there and that, as he blessed him, he gave him a charge, saying, You shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. And that Yaakov obeyed his father and his mother, and had gone to Padan Aram. And Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan pleased not Yitzchak his father, and Esau went unto Ishmael, and took besides the wives that he had, Mahalah, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth, to be his wife.
The reason I pointed us to these verses as a closing is to point out that it appears that while Esau was hurt and angered by the way this played out, he was still paying attention to what his parents, Yitzhak and Rebekah, cared about. Instead of choosing wives from among the Canaanites, he chose from his father's lineage, selecting daughters from his cousins on his dad's side.
That's good. As we leave this video segment, the fair-skinned Jacob departs the company of the red and hairy Esau. Jacob is on a quest for a bride and waiting his mother's invitation back after Esau's anger has calmed down. The lives of 2 brothers will continue, and they will meet again. And the second-born Jacob leaves with the blessing normally intended for the older, just as Yahuwah told Rebekah before these 2 men were born. In our next segment titled, Jacob Meets Laban, Trickery Brings 2 Brides, Jacob will find his bride and much more.
Thanks again for joining us. Shalom.